Okay, so let me jump back into code here. I don't need this anymore. What have I been doing today? Most of today has been really just going through the new input system for UE5. I'm not a huge fan of the new input system. Um, there are pros and cons to everything. I like um, what it's trying to offer. I don't like that it's not a straightforward implementation. The It kind of feels like a hack job. Um, kind of feels like working in Unity. I got another Unity dig into there. I'm gonna keep throwing those out. Um, it's not a bad idea. It's just it's not a straightforward thing to set up. For example, yeah, player controller, cool. So to use it, normally you would call in your standard input system at some point, but there's a extra layer here where you have to define the uh, the enhanced input subsystem. It's a separate thing. Even though they're gradually trying to transition completely into the enhanced input system, you still have to manually implement it, which is weird since it's turned on by default in Unreal 2 or Unreal 5.2 and above. It's on by default. In Unreal 4.27 through 5.1, I think it's not on by default, and you have to do it. But anyway, it's on by default, but you still have to manually implement it, which is annoying. Um, but that's what this is here. Um, and then your binding setup is kind of similar. So you have your input component and your bind action. You don't no longer have bind axis from what I'm gathering. It's still new. I'm still new to it, I guess. So I could be wrong. But here's the setup for that. So instead of um, just grabbing your input component, which would be off of your player controller, I'm going through my player controller and then to my player. You can build all this on your player directly. Um, I don't like doing that for a few reasons. One is if you have a multiplayer game and you can swap out your characters, it's better to have a player controller that handles your input, and then it doesn't matter what player it's talking to. They all have a very similar pipeline for transferring input data onto the character. I prefer that method because it's scalable. Whereas if you build it directly on the player, then you have to account for, if the player dies, what input is transferred back to the player when in death. If the object is destroyed, I no longer have those inputs, and a few other hiccups. So anyway, I do it through this method here. Um, if you're on your player, it would be set up player input component or character input component, whatever the one is for that. Um, so yeah, bind axis is no longer a thing from what I gather. Everything is kind of handled inside of the new bind action. You can tell it to use an axis or not internally. I'm not too big on things that I it's like Indian in the cupboard. You should not use magic you don't understand. And I don't like having things that are obfuscated away from me. I like to know where they are and how to access that kind of thing. And I feel like there's still a bit of guesswork um, because it's not super intuitive, or maybe I'm just kind of stupid. But I'm okay to either of those scenarios. But I digress. So anyway, I'm casting to the new input system and setting these up. Um, these are now held in Blueprint, and I have to That's kind of like the big complaint, I guess, from what I've read in the forums is it's the old input system was in the editor. Technically, it was not Blueprint, but kind of was. But you could access it in C++. The new system definitely is a blueprinted system, which means that it's not text-based and there's some voodoo magic happening in the background that I'm not seeing. I'm not a fan of that. But anyway, um, events are kind of set up the same way, except now you have, let me go ahead and just nuke this. You now have, if I open up this enum, you've got triggered, started, ongoing, none, completed, or canceled. And these are kind of the various events that are being handled behind the scenes. There are some systems in the background that are dealing with this, from my understanding. And whatever I pick is what it's dealing with. So right now these are untriggered, but kind of like the same deal with your IE pressed and IE released. There's a thing there, there's a polling system in there that is responding to the key is down versus the key is up. It's kind of the same thing here, except it's also keeping track of timings on the key. So on the old system, you would have to manually create your various variables for different effects. So if you had a scenario where you wanted to check if your key was down and key was up, and you also wanted to check how long you were holding the key, you would have to create your own system for handling that. The advantage of the new input system is that's already built into there. So instead of you having to go through the extra legwork to make that happen, you just activate it in in the blueprint. But I kind of like having the finite control over my stuff. Now you don't have a lack of control with this. Realistically, you can still control the timings, but it just feels weird. And it might just because it's new, but whatever. Anyway, these are set up, and you can see here on my implementation side, I just have some strings that are being fired off whenever I push, just so I can see what is happening on completed and ongoing. And if you're one of my students and we talk about naming conventions and being consistent with your naming convention because it's going to confuse the heck out of people, this is one of those cases where the naming convention is just awful. So we have started, ongoing, and all those. And if you look inside this enum, again, inside this list here, um, we have what, six of these. But in the blueprint side of things, if I jump into here, um, oh yeah, so you're no longer doing project settings and then inputs. Right, so normally you would set them up here. You'd add a map and then you'd specify your key and whatever, and then you would talk to it in code. You don't really do that anymore. You can see that this says it's deprecated, which means they're no longer using it, and they're in time hoping to remove it. Um, well, now the way it's going to be working is go ahead and close that. You make the blueprint variation of this. So system input, and you have this kind of stuff. So you have a mapping context, and then you have your various inputs, and each one of these is its own kind of thing. You give it a name, it behaves either as a Boolean, is it pressed or not? Um, and then you can pick if it's going to have an output numerically. So it could be an axis for moving left and right, up and down, or if you want a 3D axis or whatever, you can put those in there. But then on here you have some triggers, and you can specify: is this a trigger for being held? Is it for being tapped? What is the story on these? Well, there's a lot of options in here. There's like 10 different options in here, right? But there's only 6 options on the other side. You see what I'm getting at? Um, and then pressed, from what I gather, pressed corresponds to started. Released corresponds to completed. So back here on this side of things, um, started is pressed, completed is released, ongoing is triggered, but is it, or is it held? Like, I don't know. Um, how the hell should I know? See what I did there? Because hold is something a little bit different. You can kind of read what it does here. It says trigger fires once input has remained actuated um, for hold time threshold in seconds. Trigger may optionally fire once or repeatedly fire. And if you go and you open these, you can expand these. You can specify a time here. And this is one of the nice things about it is like so before, and I should really open up the old one just to show you how I had to do it before. Is I'd make a variable for pressed, released, held. I'd have one for hold time, and this would be per key, by the way. So it would be like, W key, held, pressed, released, um, hold time, tap count, and whatever for that one key. And then for the D key, I'd have the same thing, but mapped out for the D key and have one for the space bar and have one for whatever. Um, so this is supposed to simplify that because a lot of these are already built in. I'm just, changing some values. So that's kind of nice. But there are just some user friendliness things on here that kind of bug me. But anyway, you have these timings that you can do. There's the actual actuation or activation threshold. So right now it's like 0.5 seconds, um, and whatever not. And you can say, is this a one shot or is there like a duration or whatever? You can modify those here and here. And I can also do, again, I have a pressed and a released option on here. So I'm experimenting with how this is giving me feedback, but it's not 100% clear on how these are going to work. For example, like pressed, trigger fire once when input exceeds the activation threshold. So, you push the button, it would only react once after that threshold's been implemented. Um, Theoretically, the release side should be um, when you release, it does the thing. But let's see what it says here. Trigger returns ongoing while whilst um, choice of words there, while input exceeds the actualization threshold. So this fires once only when input drops back below activation threshold. So if you let go of the key. Um, Pulse is, I guess, kind of like tap, but it's continuous. Um, Trigger that fires at an interval in seconds while input is activated. So I guess you're holding it down, but it has um, a delay built in, so you can have like a rapid fire or a slower fire or whatever it is. I think that's how Pulse is supposed to work. So normally I would build a timer into that. So if you've been working with me on like in Unity doing um, the Space Invaders, and we're having the firing mechanism, and every time you hit the button, we built a custom timer to handle the delay between firing. My assumption is Pulse is handles that built in, so you don't have to build that timer. And then tap, um, I guess, is getting a time in seconds or milliseconds between the last press to see if they're within a certain threshold. Does that count as a tap? Um, and I'll have to show you how I had them set up manually. But so there are some pros, but there are some cons as far as exactly how these line up with um, these trigger events here. I I don't see a direct correlation one to one. Um, and then let's see. So anyway, I got those. Oh, and then on the mapping context, oh, he's just kind of walking around over here. The context is kind of neat because this is where you really specify what keys kind of go into this. So for my movement event, this is really all the different movement options, right? But I don't have to do it this way. Um, I can, and I have on here, you can say I divided the input up for my right input because it's a side scroller, left or right. Um, and on this one, I just have it, my D key, my right pad, my thumbstick, and because this is derived off of my input values, these guys here, I've got one for up, down, left, and right. Whatever I've put here, that kind of gets inherited through the different buttons. And then I can do some extra work on it. But I can also specify on here, inside of a specific button, I can give that button its own context to kind of override what's already happening, which is kind of cool. Um, so there's some areas that try to make it more flexible, but it's like anything else, you kind of have to just dig in and get your hands dirty. So this is what I've been doing most of the day, is playing with this. And I've played with it off and on, but I'm trying to get a really good understanding of this so it's not so foreign to me. Because the other system, it does take a while to set up because you have to do everything manually, but I know how to plan for that. I don't know how to plan for this. So I'm like, I could just do it and get it done, or I can learn the new system and maybe it'll be better. So I'm forcing myself to learn it. Um, but anyway, so I got those going, and then I've done some testing. So here he is in all his glory. And oh, let me go ahead and put the console up so we can see the output. So far you can see in my output window, if I tap, you can see I've got, um, the right was pressed. There is a hold duration. So the hold got fired for a few seconds or half a second, however many. So it spits out based on um, frame data, I guess. And then down here, we have the release when I let go of the key. And if I continue holding, of course, he'll start his walk. And these are working. And you can see that this is holding really well with what I was trying to do. I have the two different animations, an animation set for left and an animation set for right. And of course, I'm able to divide them. And I have that turn, and that turn is working pretty good. There's some flipping on the legs there, but that happens because the way he's standing. So if you look, his left leg is forward, his right leg is back. Okay. But when he finishes the turn, so I'm going to go ahead and just turn. When he finishes a turn, his right leg is forward, his left leg is back. So that's just an example of when the animation's finished, it's going to shift to the next available animation. So that's one of those things where you want when the foot's whatever position he stops in is closely matched to the position he's going to be standing in. So when it blends between the two frames, it's a smooth blend versus a jerky one. And then, like we were looking at earlier on the exports for the test, there's that step. I can do that step off, and then he continues into the walk. That works, but you can see that it's a side scroller, so we're not going to see a whole lot of him shifting in the Z direction. Um, but you can definitely see him as he walks. He shrinks and then kind of pops. And that's because he does move kind of diagonally away from us. And then he gets reset back to that position. And you can see that here. So you can look at the line right at his feet here. There's a line, and you can just watch as he walks. He walks slightly off of that line toward the screen or away from the screen, depending on which side, and then gets slid back. So that's one of those things back in Maya. I'd have to clean up that animation, make sure that it's centered, make sure that there's no weird wonkiness. But um, as I'm testing this, I can definitely get to see if it's going to work or is it not going to work. And really, what I really wanted to test between the motion capture and the new rig was how well it's going to work for what I want, and if I can divide these animations up for a left and a right setup. And so far, that's working. He's turning a lot better than the implementation that I had in the old version of the game, where he just kind of like flips and he kind of gets there. Now, as far as input is concerned, he's definitely moving a bit too slow. You want your inputs to be very quick, um, because if anybody's played the new Mortal Kombat games, Mortal Kombat, sorry, Mortal Kombat 11, Mortal Kombat 1, the movement is very sluggish. It takes a few seconds, at least it feels like, for when you hit the button, and then takes a second for him to throw a punch. Or if you move forward, it takes a few seconds before he actually starts moving forward. There's a bit of a delay. Um, that's not a good user experience. I want the character to move pretty instantaneously when you move. You want them to be pretty responsive. Mm, I got a seed from the T. U. Yeah, but anyway, you want your animations to be very responsive and very snappy. So the longer the delay is, so like whenever I turn, if I turn and just let go of a key, him doing that is perfectly fine. But if I were to hold the key, I would want to cancel that animation and then immediately move into like a stepping back, turn into walking kind of thing. I haven't recorded that, so I don't have that animation, but that's what I would want to go into. See how there's a delay between those? So that would have to be a little bit quicker. Um, but this allows me to kind of see what I need and kind of plan. And also, like, I'm moving forward and then I immediately move back. Like, moonwalking is so cool. I could be Michael Jackson now. But this is not how it's supposed to work. It's just one of those weird quirks of how the system is currently set up. But to kind of look at how those are hooked up, we have the animation blueprint. Um, I don't mind the animation blueprint too much. If you can handle between programming things and doing them visually, if it's something that would benefit better from a visual system, do it visually. So animations, they work better if you can do them visually. Um, the movement input system, that's better if you can do that on the programmically. So it's a give or take. I like some aspects of the system, but some things I don't like. Um, so here's an example of this broken into two different sections. So if you're doing Unity, it might look similar. I like this a little bit better than Unity's, go figure. But you have your entry point. And we're starting off, my default is facing to the right. So here's my idle right. And then I have a choice of turning left. So if I turn to the left side of the screen to face the other way, there's an implementation that takes us down here and that handles my idle to my left. And if I want to go back to right, that takes us back up here. And right now, this is basically doing the same thing twice, which is not the best system. But you can see this one handles, start walking to the right, and then once I'm finished walking to the right, it'll go into here, and you can kind of see the rules for how that works. I'll go into those for a second, but these are identical. This is the exact same thing as that, except one goes to the other side of the screen, the other one goes to the other side of the screen. Doing something twice is always bad because that gives you not only is it double the work, but then you increase the number of chances it can break, right? The more moving parts there are, the more things break. So this is not a good system, but it does work for the test. What I would ultimately need to do is set it up so that in either state, so a character state, walking, running, sitting, jumping, whatever, make it so that in any one of those states, there is a check for are you facing right or left? And if that's the case, just run the appropriate animation, not do things twice. So that's what I need to work toward for this system. Um, but right now, this is working for what I have. But you can take a look at how this is. So just inside of the idle, it's just calling that idle animation. That animation does loop. You can set the looping value here, by the way, or you can go back to the animation itself and then set the loop here. So you can see there's a loop check there. Whatever I do here, I can send over there. Um, and then if I go back to my grounded, so this is my state broken down. Again, if I go to here, my transition, um, this I'm not currently using. This is what I want to go to, but I haven't hooked that up yet. But right now it just checks if he's facing to the right. If he's currently not facing to the right, then he would go to the next transition, which is turn left. That runs the left animation. And then once that animation finishes, there's a little arrow. That one I don't need. Then in here, I'm just checking to see the exit time on this animation. And I put a value in. That is one thing that's kind of nice in Unity on their animation system is you can see the graph. Um, can't really see that here, but you can visually slide your amount of exit time. This is one of those moments where I like something better in Unity. Because this I have to do numerically. I type in a value and I kind of have to guess to see what's going to happen. I don't get to see it in editor. Um, but then, once I'm in my left or my right, doesn't really matter which one because the logic is the same. If I'm in my idle, and then you see I have that check. I check here what direction I'm facing and what my speed value is. So if my character is moving, if he's technically in motion, I figure out if he's facing right or left, and then if that's the case, then I'm running um, the appropriate animation. So this is start walking to the left. I have a start run, but it's really a walk. Once this animation finishes, because there's an exit time on that animation, once the animation finishes, it gets blended out into the actual walk, and then we continue. And there are some other things inside of Unreal um, that are kind of nice. So I do like. Try to save this real quick, just in case it crashes. I do like the blend spaces in Unreal. They're pretty convenient. Blend spaces and montages have a lot of use, and it's definitely something that Unity could use. So let me grab a blend space here. They did change the blend space a little bit. So let's say I do this from idle to walk. There used to be a 1D and then a 3D. They just removed the 1D because you can handle all of the 1D stuff inside of the 3D one. It's just the 1D one was more simplified, but because of its simplified nature, it was more limited. But inside here, you have your horizontal and your vertical axes, which is this thing on your graph. And then inside there, you just specify. So um, since I'm a side scroller, I can say, left and right is going to be a speed value. So I'm going to say speed here, and then I'll change my graph to represent speed. It doesn't really matter. You can name this whatever. And then my vertical could be based on height. It could be based on distance. It could be based on direction. It doesn't really matter. Or I could do this one based on direction, and then I could do the other one based on speed. It doesn't matter. You can make this work however you like. But let's say my min value is 0, my max value is the max walking speed in Unreal default is 600, but I like to do a 300 and then a 600 to run. So I'll do 600, even though I don't have a run in here. But you can see that that updates my graph. And then I can say, hey, let me start off. I need better naming conventions here. This is idle turning. Where is idle stance? Idle stance facing to the left. I'll do idle stance facing to the right. Okay. And I can pull that in on my graph somewhere. So let's say I'm idle when I'm at 0. And then as I start moving, maybe I want to transition into the walking. So this is idle to run. Let me clear that out and get my walk. Okay, so then on here at some point, just drop that in to like there. And then as this naturally starts moving, as it starts gaining speed, he'll start taking smaller and smaller steps until he blends into that walk. And that's a really nice feature to have. And you can actually look at him from the side here, depending on how abruptly I start. So right now I'm at 0, but if I just ramp into this, it's a pretty good adjustment, right? Hardly any stutter. It looks like he's taken a natural step. So I don't necessarily have to have a push off animation um, if I don't want it. If you want to have it, you can have it. I like having that because it gives him a little extra oomph. I can get some more power into the initial step. Um, and then I can do my transitions later. But this is one of those cool options, and I can very easily blend between things without having to do additional states. So let's say I'll just put this guy all the way to the end here. So if I'm kind of creeping through a hallway, maybe I can do this one. I don't have to make a creep animation. I have this, but then if I want to do max, I can do max. Or if I had a run, I could do the run. All right, so let's say I like that. And then I can come back into my animation here. And I'm going to just make a new state. I'll just call this one idle walk. And I can drag my idle walk in here. And the only thing that I really have to worry about this is my speed value, so I can just plug that in. Now I'm getting my speed from my character's velocity. So on the event graph, which looks like a bunch of spaghetti, by the way, um, I'm getting a reference to the player. You can also do this in code. I was just lazy, and it's a lot easier to do it in Blueprint. Um, and I really just wanted to see if I can get it running. But anyway, so once I get a reference to my player, um, from my player's reference, here's this flying spaghetti monster. I need to know how fast he's going. So this is the movement component that is on the character. So I get that movement component. And on that movement component, there is a velocity value. So I'm grabbing that velocity value. And then I need to know what that value is as far as a float is concerned. So I break that down to a float by getting its length. If you did this in code, you'd get its, in C++, I believe the function is vector size, not vector length, but it returns the same thing. It basically gives you a float, and then you pass that into whatever. So in this case, I'm just holding a variable for whatever that speed is. If it's bigger than 0, then I know we're good. And then, yeah, so that's running. So right here, I can just start walking and he'll naturally transition into that walk. I don't have to do any additional hookups. Now I don't have the other way, so he just does the same thing. But on there, inside of this blend space, I do have an option for direction. So I can really change this system so that it does it based on direction. So let's say my vertical, I'll call this one direction. And let's get, I believe the natural world direction is 1 on a positive, and then the reverse of that is a negative. So I'm going to do a minimum value of a -1, and I'll do a positive value of 1. Will it let me? It doesn't like that change. It's okay. Um, did that get cleared off? Looks like it got cleared off. So where's my idle to walk? So walking to the right. And then my, yeah, walking to the left. I'm getting out of bounds just because I think I still have stuff on there. So let me go back to that. Yeah. Let me get this one. You can link these together, by the way. You can have these play into each other. Let me go ahead and just nuke that one. And I'll get this one. Do I have 2 up here? Okay. Get that down here. All right, and put that back down to 1. Where's my left? Here's left. And then my right is up here. And then where is my idle? Idle to the left. And my idle to the right. So depending on my direction, I can set that direction value. If I am positive world, I'd be this. If I'm negative world, so he does this little turn, and then here, right? I can set up my transition animation here. So where is my turn to the right? That would happen on this side. And my turn to the left would happen on this side. So here, if I'm getting close to that one, I would do this one. And then I would finish. And then on this one, I can do that as I'm getting back down, going closer to my idle. Or whatever not. And I can play with this value and kind of pick where these are at. This is really a weird spot for that because this is suggesting that between walking and walking, I suddenly just change a direction. So I'll move this one. Which way is that? This is right to left. Yeah. Let's see how that is. So here that turns. Oh, I should really go the other way. You can kind of see that that transitions this way or the other way. I can kind of play with that and kind of pick wherever. This is really a poor implementation of that, but you have the options to do it on a single graph, which is kind of nice. If you're doing um, kind of like an FPS game, a first person game, you can do your strafes and your turns all in the same graph, which saves you a lot of effort by having a single graph and it just does it based on your facing direction. So anyway, this is kind of broken because of the way I have this set up, but we can see how that works. Um, I don't really have a direction value set, but look, here he is. He's trying to do stuff. And if I walk, he does that. If I let go, I got this one. You know, that's whatever. Anyway, it's kind of neat. But that's not what I'm using. Maybe a little bit later, I'll get that fine-tuned once I decide on which one I want to use. But here's my grounded, and this is the one that I'm actually using here. There we go. So there's that one, and there's that. That's pretty much all I've done so far. Kind of played around with the different values and tinkered. Um, and yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna hop off, and I will catch you on the next round. I'll let you know what's coming up a bit later. See ya.